support.
Hi, I'm continually getting an out-of-memory error message on my machine, and it keeps me from using my programs. What can I do?
Those programs that you're running require greater RAM memory than your machine currently has. If you wish to run these programs, you need to upgrade. Tech support line, how may I help you?
Yes, I hope so. I just bought a new program and I'm having trouble installing it. I keep getting the message, insufficient disk space, whenever I try to load it. What's the problem?
You don't have enough space left on your hard drive to install the program files necessary for your new software. If you want to use the program, you must either delete current programs from your hard drive or upgrade to a larger one.
Most people think of computers as complicated machines, yet they're really as simple to understand as many familiar things we encounter every day. Your PC's hard drive, for instance, is simply a storage container. If you needed to store all the water you would drink over a lifetime, would you store it in a container like this, or would you store it in a container like this?
The engine of your PC is its processor. For high performance and speed, the type of car you drive is critical. If you had to get somewhere quickly, would you drive a car like this? Or would you drive a car like this?
Your PC's memory is like the concept of storage. Yet in memory, pieces of information are stored in individual compartments, which enable the processor to do its work. If you think of the offices and the buildings behind me as individual storage compartments, which building would you use to organize vast amounts of information? Buildings like these? Or how about a building like this?
Hi, I'm George Carroll. You encounter these conditions every time you turn on your PC to use your favorite software. How much information can your PC store? How fast can that information be processed? And how quickly can that information be accessed by your PC?
Hi, I'm Sue Drake. The water tower is like your PC's hard drive. The larger it is, the more information you can store. The car's engine is like your PC's processor. The more powerful it is, the faster your PC will operate. And the office buildings, they're like your PC's memory. The more compartments you have available, the greater your PC's capacity is for working with large amounts of information.
Effectively using the latest versions of your educational, entertainment, and personal productivity software will require you to have greater storage capacity, larger memory capability, and faster processing speed.
The one that I was looking for. But how will I know if it's right for my PC or if it will even fit?
Well, let's look at the hardware requirements on the box. This software suggests a 486DX processor, 8 megabytes of memory, and 15 megabytes of hard disk space, simply to store the programs. But we all know that you can't have too much computing capacity when running today's multimedia software, especially if you're thinking of upgrading your operating system to something like Windows 95, which to operate efficiently, many publications like New Media Magazine are now saying will need 16 megabytes of memory and a high-speed 486 processor.
Well, my PC at home is a 486 DX2 66 processor with 8 megabytes of memory, so I'm okay there. But I only have a 170 megabyte hard drive, which is just about full. That means I might not have enough storage space to store this software.
That's right, Sue. And most machines purchased more than a year ago would probably need memory and processor upgrades as well. One approach is to call the store where you purchased your PC and get from them a quote to do the upgrade work. But you pay a price for that convenience, and you lose the flexibility of having your PC while the work is being done. You might also be concerned about putting either your business or personal information in the hands of a computer store technician. Another approach is to buy the parts and do the upgrade yourself. You'll save money, and you'll be able to do the upgrade on your own schedule in the security of your home.
For all of us, the PC is rapidly becoming an important part of our everyday lives. It entertains us, educates us, and helps us to be more productive. Developing greater knowledge and skill in using and maintaining this machine will significantly enhance its value in our lives. And upgrading your PC is a lot easier than you might think.
George, I was in my local home improvement store the other day, and I couldn't believe all the items available for everyone to repair and improve their homes.
Owning and working with a PC, Sue, is the same as it is with a home. Each of us can probably find a computer superstore nearby where we can obtain all of the parts that we need to do our own hardware upgrades.
Let's start by becoming familiar with the PC case and its internal parts. We want to make upgrading your PC as easy and as comfortable for you as we can. By first becoming familiar with the inside of a PC, we can increase your confidence and decrease any apprehension you may have about performing your own upgrades.
Whenever you work on your PC, you want to make sure you have a safe and firm work surface. Also a work surface that allows you to get access to your PC from all different angles. That'll make it much more convenient to work on different parts on the inside of your PC without having to move your machine or get up and move around. When you work on your PC, you'll notice that there are two different kinds of cases. One is a desktop case, which you're all very familiar with, or a tower type of case. Once you start to work on your PC, you'll need several tools. The first is a screwdriver. Since you're likely to be removing and replacing a good number of screws, if you've got a powered screwdriver, that'll make your job much easier. You might also need a smaller Phillips type screwdriver to work with the screws that you'll encounter on the inside of the PC. Some PCs use Torx type screws, and if you have one of those PCs, you'll need a Torx screwdriver. The last tool that you're likely to need is some needle nose pliers. They come in very handy in lifting small pieces or small parts from the inside of the PC, and sometimes you might need to bend things a little bit, and the pliers will help out greatly in that situation. Before actually beginning to work on your PC, you'll always want to turn the power off. And just to provide some extra protection for you and your equipment, you'll want to make sure that the power cord is disconnected from your AC wall socket. The final step before removing the cover of your PC is to disconnect the cables from its rear panel. Start with the power cord and remove the cables for the keyboard and the mouse as well. As you're doing this, you'll want to notice where you're removing the cables from so it'll be easier to put them back in place. And if necessary, label the positions of the cables to again make it convenient to plug the cables back in. If you have other peripheral devices like a modem, a printer, or speakers, you want to remove those cables from the rear as well. Lastly, remove the cable for the video monitor, which if it's screwed in, you'll need your screwdriver to loosen them, as I've already done here. Or some peripheral devices come with thumb screws that make the job of loosening them much easier. Once you've disconnected the cables from the rear panel, you're ready to remove the cover. To do so, you'll need to loosen several screws on the back of the PC. You should refer to the user documentation to see which screws those are so that you don't inadvertently loosen the screws that are holding the power supply in place. This particular manufacturer has done a good job of labeling which screws are to be removed by placing arrows next to them. You might also want to refer to the user documentation to see how the cover is to be removed after the screws have been loosened. Some covers come off from the top, while others slide to the front or the rear. This particular PC has a cover that slides slightly to the front and then lifts off. As you're removing the cover, you want to make sure that the cover hasn't snagged on any internal cables. You can see the case next to our desktop, the tower case, has a cover already removed which slides up from the top after screws have been loosened from the rear panel in the same fashion as they've been done on the desktop. You will see a number of parts once you've removed the cover from your PC. Let's take a brief tour of those parts just to become familiar with the internal layout of the components inside our machines. We're going to do it first in a tower model because it's easier to identify those parts given the additional space in the tower. As we look at the parts, please note that this is the front of the PC, while this is the back of the PC, and this is the top of the PC. So near the top and back of the PC is the power supply, which is responsible for providing current to all of the electronic devices inside the PC. Adjacent to the power supply are different data storage peripheral devices. Toward the top end are two diskette drives. In the center is a CD-ROM drive, and at the bottom are two hard disk drives. Each of these devices are connected to the power supply through the multicolored lines. These devices are also connected to other circuit boards near the back and bottom of the PC, which are called controllers. Here is the hard disk controller with a cable running to the hard drive. Next to it is the video controller, which is responsible for what we see on our monitors. Next is a parallel and serial I/O controller, which is responsible for printer operations and a modem and possibly a mouse. And lastly is a network controller, which is responsible for any connection to a network. All of these circuit boards are plugged into the motherboard, which is this green circuit board responsible for all of the operations of the PC. A major component of the motherboard is the area where the memory is located. These are called RAM sockets, and this is where the memory is located. We can see two of the RAM sockets are unused on this PC, while the other 6 of the 8 total sockets are filled with memory at this point. Also connected to the motherboard is the CPU. In this particular instance, it's an Intel 486DX2 CPU plugged into a ZIF socket, or a zero insertion force socket. Characteristically, they are blue. This socket has a lever on it which will make inserting and removing CPUs very easy to do. Next, we will take a look at the desktop model to see where its components are located. As you can see in the desktop model, all of the PC's internal components are more tightly arranged. In this case, this is the front, while this is the rear. In the rear of the PC, again, is a power supply, while toward the front are diskette drives and a hard drive. This large green circuit board that you see occupying this entire area is the motherboard. On the motherboard, again, will be found an Intel CPU. This is a 486SX CPU. You'll notice the absence of the blue ZIF socket, and instead is an overdrive socket, which is in place to accept an overdrive CPU upgrade. Next to the CPU is the hard drive, and on this PC, the hard drive is above the memory sockets, where in the tower model we saw the memory sockets easily accessible. With this particular PC, we will need to remove this hard drive in order to do the memory upgrade.
So George, why do we need to do a CPU upgrade?
Sue, the main reason to do a CPU upgrade is to make your PC run faster. You might also do a CPU upgrade because you have a particular piece of software that requires a level of computing power that your current CPU just does not provide.
Now I know there's a lot of terms that we need to define. How about if we start with CPU?
CPU means Central Processing Unit, and the variety of CPUs coming from a number of manufacturers. The main manufacturer that we're all familiar with is Intel, and Intel makes the Pentium CPU, the 8486 CPU, the 8386, and even the very old 8286. And here, as a matter of fact, we have an example of an 8486 CPU. This CPU from Intel, as you can see, is considerably larger than its predecessor, an 8286 CPU. Here we also have a heatsink which attaches to the top of a CPU in order to direct heat away from the CPU as it's operating.
A few other terms associated with CPU. What are they, George?
Well, the first one is megahertz. Megahertz is a term for a measure of frequency relating to how fast your CPU is operating internally to manipulate the information in the CPU. And the CPUs operate anywhere from 25 megahertz in some cases to 133 megahertz in other cases. So it's just simply a measure of how fast that CPU is operating internally. Another term that you really should be familiar with is ZIF socket. A ZIF socket is a zero insertion force socket meant to receive the CPU without having to apply any pressure to get the CPU into the socket. You can also remove the CPU the same way. The ZIF socket has a little lever on the side of it which pushes the CPU out in case of removing it and pulls the CPU down into place in the case of installing it. And lastly, a term you should also know is Intel overdrive. That's a type of CPU designed to go into the system next to the CPU which is already there.
This seems to be a little bit more complicated than buying a pair of shoes, although size and fit are similar issues. What other things do we need to know before ordering parts?
There are several things you do need to consider, Sue, before actually placing the order for your parts. The first decision you need to make is what kind of CPU upgrade are you going to be performing, because there are three different ways that you can perform the same CPU upgrade. The first way is to replace the CPU that's currently in your system. The second way is to buy an Intel overdrive upgrade, and in that situation the new part fits in alongside of the CPU that's already there. The third possibility is to do a piggyback upgrade, in which case the new part just clamps on top of the CPU that's already there. The next decision that you need to make requires you to refer to the documentation that came with your PC. You need to check the user guide to see what possible models and speeds are compatible with your current system, so that you can decide which CPU upgrade you can place in your system and still have it be compatible with the system you now have.
So what are the parts and materials that we will need to do the CPU upgrade?
There are several things that we will need, Sue. And the first is we'll need to get the CPU upgrade itself. We'll also need a heat sink with or without a cooling fan to make sure that the CPU doesn't operate at too high of a temperature. And we'll also need instructions from both the manufacturer of the PC and the manufacturer of the CPU upgrade module. That way, as we're proceeding with the upgrade, we'll have all of the information in front of us that we need to answer questions as we go along. When actually placing the purchase, also make sure to ask the salesperson about their return policy and their warranty terms, so that in the event that you do have a problem with the parts you've purchased, you'll know what to encounter then. Also, make sure to ask the salesperson what technical support resources are available, so that if you do have questions as you're proceeding with the upgrade that aren't answered by the instructions, you'll know how to proceed. And when you do make the purchase, consider the 4 different possibilities that you have. The first is that you can purchase the parts from a mail order shop. You can also order the parts from your local computer superstore, from an appliance store, or from an office supply store. Usually our experience is that parts are less expensive when you get them through the mail order.
That sounds great, George. Let's go work on the CPU upgrade now.
That's a good idea. To begin a CPU upgrade, as in any upgrade, we first need to remove the cables from the rear of the PC, take off the cover, and also remove any other internal components which may be obstructing our access to the spot of the motherboard where we need to do the CPU upgrade. There are 3 types of CPU upgrades. The first uses an overdrive module. The second involves removing and replacing the CPU with a ZIF socket. And the third is a piggyback upgrade. As you can see on this particular model, we have an overdrive socket placed immediately next to the current CPU. We will be placing a CPU module in this socket as part of the overdrive upgrade. In a ZIF socket situation, we would be removing the CPU entirely and placing a new one in its place. We will see more about that later. In a piggyback upgrade, we would be placing a CPU module directly on top of the CPU that's already in place. In inserting the CPU, you have to be very careful about handling it. The pins are very fragile, and the CPU module needs to be oriented properly before insertion. Otherwise, one of the pins could be bent. As you will notice, underneath the CPU, in this section, there is an extra pin out of alignment with all the other rows. That pin is called the key pin. You need to look at the overdrive socket and identify the spot where the key pin is. On this particular overdrive socket, it is located here. Once we know we have the key pin in its proper alignment, we are ready to place the CPU into the overdrive socket. Something else you should be aware of when handling a CPU module of any type is static electricity. You always want to avoid any type of static. If you are working in a situation where you think you might have static electricity, be sure to first discharge that by touching something else before you handle the CPU module. Once you know you have it in the proper position, you will need to apply some pressure to have it snap firmly into place. When it does snap firmly into place, you will feel it. After inserting the CPU overdrive module, you need to make sure that it's firmly seated into the overdrive connector. And you do that by viewing it along the edge and making sure that you cannot see any of the CPU pins. Here we see the CPU with a heatsink mounted on top. This heatsink functions to draw heat away from the CPU to keep it cool during its operations. At other times, we might see a fan in a similarly positioned spot. This particular PC was a 25 megahertz 486 SX. And when we inserted this CPU overdrive module, we turned it into a 50 megahertz 486 DX2. Per the specifications in the user documentation for this PC, that requires us to make changes to jumper pin settings that determine how the CPU will interact with the motherboard. Here we see a set of 3 jumper pins labeled P7. These pins are labeled from bottom to top, pin 1, in the middle pin 2, and then at the top pin 3. Our documentation suggests that we adjust this setting along with some of these other jumper pins, and we do that by moving the small jumpers from their current location to the new location specified by the user documentation. When we attach a jumper, it will connect any two of these 3 pins to one another. You need to refer to the user documentation for the particular CPU upgrade you are performing to see how to adjust these jumper pin settings. This is a brief example of doing a CPU upgrade with a ZIF socket. We are going to replace this 486SX with a 486DX2 by first lifting this lever, which will release all pressure from the CPU, at which point we can remove it. We can then place the 486DX2 in the same place and press the lever back down and lock it into place to perform the upgrade. This is how we will do it. First, I'm going to lift the lever to release all pressure from the current CPU. We then, you can see, remove it quite easily. And place it aside while we pick up the other CPU and place it into the socket. Now, to complete the upgrade, we simply press the lever down into position and lock it. The CPU upgrade is now complete. Returning to our desktop model, we now have our overdrive CPU module in place. If we had removed any components in order to access this part of the motherboard, we would need to replace them now. To proceed with the CPU upgrade, you will first need to put your PC back together again. Return the case to its original position and reattach all the cables you disconnected earlier. Reconnect the cable for the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse, and any other devices which you previously had attached. You will also need to run the PC's setup program to adjust its internal configuration so that it will now operate with the new CPU upgrade module. When you turn on the PC, if it doesn't function properly, you'll want to make sure to double check that you have firmly and completely inserted the CPU upgrade module. You will also want to check to make sure that you've adjusted any motherboard settings or jumpers. As you can see, when the PC is first turned on, it reports that it now detects a CPU coprocessor which it was not previously configured for. It then prompts us to enter the setup program, which we are now doing. And as we do enter the setup program, it automatically updates itself for the numeric coprocessor which it finds. You just proceed by hitting enter as it's prompting us, and then we see all of the normal system configuration options. At this point, we don't need to concern ourselves with any of them because the setup program has automatically updated itself for the CPU upgrade. To finish, we simply exit while saving our changes. After doing so, the system will then reboot and make use of the new CPU upgrade module.
We have just discussed how important it is to upgrade our CPU, and as well we've seen how easy it is to do. Along with that, upgrading our memory is just as important for working with today's multimedia and Windows 95 software. In the past, though, 286-based machines came with 1 megabyte of memory. 386-based machines came with 2 megabytes, and most recently our 486-based machines came with 4 megabytes of memory. But that amount of space isn't going to be enough to work with today's multimedia software, as well as the software coming out tomorrow. In those cases, we're going to want at least 8 megabytes of memory in order for the processor to do its work efficiently. George, what terms and definitions should we be considering for doing a memory upgrade?
Yes, Sue. There are several terms we need to discuss before proceeding with our memory upgrade. And the first term is RAM. That's Random Access Memory. That's the term we hear discussed all the time in terms of the memory being used by the CPU in our PC. Now, RAM is measured in 2 ways. The first is in terms of size, and the second in terms of speed. Where size is concerned, memory comes in units of megabytes, 1, 4, 8, 16, sometimes even larger units. In terms of speed, the units are measured in nanoseconds, 60, 70, 80 nanoseconds. And that speed we're talking about really is the refresh rate with which the memory is able to make new information available to the CPU for processing. When you buy memory, the RAM comes in little packages called single inline memory modules. The last term we need to discuss before proceeding is the power-on self-test, or POST. The reason that's important for your memory upgrade is that right after you've performed the upgrade, you will see, as part of that POST, your PC count up the amount of memory that it's finding. That is always an important step to make sure that the amount of memory that it's counting is equal to what you've actually installed in the PC.
Before purchasing additional memory, there are several things that you need to determine. First, how much memory is in your PC now, and how much memory do you want it to have? Second, what type of SIM is compatible with your PC, 72-pin or 30-pin? Third, if your PC requires 30-pin SIMs, are they of the 3-chip or 9-chip variety? And lastly, verify the speed of memory that's acceptable in your PC. Oh, and be sure to consult your user guide or the technical support person from the place where you purchased your PC for acceptable memory configurations to confirm that you will be ordering the proper parts.
As a final step before ordering your memory SIMs, we recommend that you open your PC and verify how many memory slots are available to receive the new memory SIMs.
Are there any other parts besides the SIMs that we need in order to do the upgrade?
Just the memory upgrade instructions in your PC's user guide and any instructions that came packaged with the new memory SIMs.
And as we said before, when ordering parts, be sure to ask about the warranty terms and return policies, just in case there is a problem. Let's see now how to do a memory upgrade.
Before beginning our memory upgrade, let's review some of the characteristics of PC memory to make sure you understand what you need to avoid any potential problems. Here we have 2 4-megabyte memory SIMs. SIM is an acronym standing for Single Inline Memory Module and is a generic term that you'll hear quite often when referring to memory for PCs. The difference between these 2 4-megabyte SIMs is that this SIM is a 30-pin SIM while this SIM is a 72-pin SIM. You need to make sure which type of SIM you're inserting into your PC. You'll notice that the 72-pin SIM is larger and has a greater amount of connector area than the 30-pin SIM. Again, make sure which kind it is that you should be inserting into your PC. Notice also that on one end of each one of these SIMs there is a notch. This notch indicates the orientation of the SIM as you insert it into the SIM slot on your PC's motherboard. Look at the SIMs that are already on the motherboard to see which direction the notch should be pointing. Another characteristic of memory SIMs is their speed, or more technically their refresh rate. The refresh rates are measured in nanoseconds and usually found in rates of 60 nanoseconds, 70 nanoseconds, and 80 nanoseconds. Most commonly 70 nanoseconds are used, but you need to consult your user documentation or again the manufacturer of your PC to make sure that you are ordering the right speed of memory. These two SIMs are both 1 megabyte 30-pin SIMs. If you are using memory of the 30-pin variety, you need to be aware that some come with 3 memory chips while others come with 9 memory chips. You should never mix the style of 30-pin memory in a PC. Stick with all 9-chip memory or 3-chip memory. And lastly, whenever you're working with any type of memory SIM, you want to avoid any discharge of static electricity because that will damage the SIM. As we saw earlier when we reviewed the internal components of the desktop model, the hard drive was covering the RAM connectors. So we're going to need to remove this hard drive in order to access the section where we will do the RAM upgrade on the motherboard. To do that, we've simply removed 2 screws from the mounting bracket, which then allows us to very carefully lift up the hard drive and slide it out of the area where we're going to be doing the upgrade. And as you can see now, we can access the memory connectors, and we see there are 4 of the connectors in total, 1 of them already being filled, and we will place a new RAM SIM next to the one that's already in there. In your particular case, you need to refer to your user documentation to see in what order the SIM slots should be filled on your PC. You'll notice right at the top of this SIM slot there is a notched gripper which will take hold of the SIM once we have it in place. At the opposite end of this SIM slot, beyond our view, there is another gripper, so that when the SIM is firmly in place, it is being held at each end of this slot by a gripper like this one. Our RAM SIM is an 8 megabyte, 72-pin, 70 nanosecond SIM, which we will be sliding into place in this first open connector. We will insert it at an angle so that it makes contact with all of the 72 pins that run the entire length of the SIM connector. When it is firmly in place, we can then push it toward the grippers with our fingers spread out so as to not put too much pressure in one spot on the SIM, and then slide it into place. After inserting the RAM SIM, return any components which you needed to move back to their original position. In this PC, that means putting the hard drive back in place. Some PCs might also require adjustments to settings on the motherboard. In most cases, though, that won't be necessary. You should refer to your user documentation just to make sure. Once you've installed your RAM sims, you have one more step that you have to go through before you're ready to use your computer, and that's to run the computer's setup program to adjust the memory configuration. Before doing that, however, you want to make sure that you put your PC back together by putting the case back on and reattaching the cables for the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse, and whatever else you might have had attached before you took your computer apart. Once you've got the computer put back together, you're ready to turn on the PC and proceed with running the computer setup program. You'll notice as the computer comes on, it's counting the memory that it recognizes on the system. That should include the memory which you've just installed with the new RAM sims, and it's recognized all of our memory. If for some reason it hadn't recognized all of the memory, the first thing you want to check is to make sure that you've got the RAM sims firmly inserted. If after checking that and you still have a problem with the system's memory count as it powers on, you'll want to contact the manufacturer of both the PC and the RAM sim to find out what their procedures are for troubleshooting your problem. As you can see further down the screen, we've now received an error indicating that the memory size has changed in our system's internal configuration. That's why we're now going to run the setup program by following the instructions we see on the keyboard, which is to simply press F10. We are now in the computer setup program, and this is a very easy configuration to change because the system automatically recognizes the new memory and it tells us so. At that point, we simply proceed through the computer's setup program without making any further changes and just exiting normally while making sure to save the changes that have been made for us. At this point, you're ready to use your computer with its newly upgraded memory.
Running out of space on your hard drive can make using your PC quite frustrating and very inconvenient. A larger hard drive is necessary to store more data files and use more programs. Doing an upgrade will enable you to do this and prolong the useful life of your computer. Before deciding which upgrade parts to purchase, George, what else do we need to understand about hard drives?
You will want to be familiar with several concepts and terms before you begin your hard drive upgrade. But first, let's look at a hard drive. This is a hard drive with its cover removed. The hard drive consists of several magnetically sensitized platters which spin at a very high rate while the hard drive is in use. As the platters spin, the read-write head moves back and forth over the surface of the hard drive platters to read and write the information stored on your hard drive. There are different types of hard drives. The most common type is an IDE hard drive. IDE stands for Integrated Disk Electronic. There are newer IDE drives called Enhanced IDE, which run slightly faster and are becoming more popular every day. There are also Small Computer Systems Interface, or SCSI, hard drives. You need to be aware of what type of hard drive is in your system now and what type you want to be buying. Hard drives also come in different capacities. The capacities are normally measured in terms of megabytes and gigabytes. A megabyte is 1 million bytes, where a byte represents a single character of information, like a 1 or an A. A gigabyte is 1,000 megabytes, or 1 billion bytes. Hard drives also come in different sizes physically. Some are 3.5 inches wide, some are 5.25 inches wide, while some are full height, some are half height, and some are third height. Again, you need to be aware of what size is appropriate for your PC's case. Lastly, you need to be familiar with the term BIOS. BIOS stands for Basic Input Output System, and it's responsible for all of the fundamental operations of your PC.
To prepare for a hard drive upgrade, there are several factors that need consideration. 1. Will you be replacing the existing hard drive or adding a new one? 2. For whatever upgrade you are considering, is there enough room in the PC case, and will special mounting brackets be needed? 3. What is the total hard drive capacity desired, and is this configuration supported by the PC's manufacturer? 4. Will this configuration require a BIOS upgrade? And 5. Do you have the proper cables for connections to both the power supply and the hard drive controller?
In final preparation for your hard drive upgrade, make sure to do a backup of your entire system to protect your data in the event of a problem. Also, make sure you have the hard drive upgrade instructions from your PC's user guide and any instructions that come with the new hard drive. Lastly, review with the vendor when you purchase the hard drive their return policy, the manufacturer's warranty terms, and find out what the available technical support resources are in the event you have to do some troubleshooting.
All right then, let's see how a hard drive upgrade is done.
The hard drive upgrade we're doing now involves replacing a 120 megabyte IDE drive with an 850 megabyte enhanced IDE drive. In using a larger hard drive, we have to recognize DOS's limitation of only being able to access 528 megabytes of disk space. In order to get around this limitation, we're going to have to make use of one of two options. We're either going to have to use a third-party software product, which usually comes with the larger hard drives, or we're going to need to upgrade to an advanced operating system. The third-party software product that usually comes with larger hard drives actually replaces part of DOS itself in order to recognize the additional disk space. In our particular case, we're going to use an advanced operating system like Windows 95, which automatically recognizes the larger hard drives. Before actually beginning your hard drive upgrade, you need to do two things. First, do a complete backup of your entire system. And when you do the backup, check the compatibility of the backup program or utility that you've used with an advanced operating system like Windows 95 if you are in fact going to be upgrading to Windows 95. Also, you're going to need to write down some information about your computer's current hard drive configuration. You'll find this information in your computer's setup program. And we're going to show you how to do that a little bit later. We are now looking at the top of our open PC. My hands are running along the front of the PC, and this area is the front of the PC while this is the back. Our hard drive, which is a 3.5-inch hard drive, is located beneath this mounting plate. As you can see, the current hard drive's power cable and data cable both help us identify the location where this hard drive is currently situated. If we were going to be adding a hard drive, instead of just replacing it, we would need to look for space inside of the case in order to locate the second hard drive. This particular case has room for only the single hard drive, which is already mounted beneath this plate. We would need to remove one of the diskette drives, which are located in this section, in order to accommodate a second hard drive. Toward the top of this area, we have a 3.5-inch diskette drive, and immediately beneath it is a 5.25-inch diskette drive. If we were to use the 5.25-inch mounting bay, we would need brackets in order to make that 3.5-inch drive fit properly. We would also need a new cable, because this current cable only has a connector for a single hard drive. You can readily obtain cables with multiple connectors on them from local computer superstores. To actually remove this hard drive, which we'll need to do in order to put the new one in its place, we first need to disconnect the power cable and the data cable, and then loosen some screws located in these positions that hold the mounting plate to the frame of the PC. We've already removed those screws, and at this point now we can simply lift up this mounting plate to remove our current hard drive. We now have the new 850 megabyte enhanced IDE hard drive attached to the mounting plate. As you can see, the hard drive is held in place on the mounting plate by these 4 screws. We removed those 4 screws in order to take off the old hard drive, and we put those screws back in place to attach the new hard drive to the mounting plate. You want to keep in mind that whenever you're handling a hard drive, you want to avoid any electrostatic shocks, any sudden vibrations that might do damage to the internal parts of the hard drive. You also want to avoid any strong magnetic fields that are sometimes produced by large pieces of equipment. To put this hard drive back in place, we simply put the mounting plate back in its original position. We reattach the power cable, and we reattach the data cable. Lastly, we would need to put back in place the 2 screws that hold the entire mounting plate to the frame of the PC. Now remember, if we were going to be adding a second hard drive as opposed to just replacing the single hard drive that was in this PC, we would need to have a data cable that has dual IDE connections on it. We would also have needed to make adjustments to jumper settings that are actually on the hard drive to designate the IDE master-slave relationship that exists between 2 IDE hard drives. If that is what you're doing, you need to refer to the manufacturer's instructions that came with each of your hard drives that show you how to place those jumper settings to establish the master-slave relationship. Lastly, remember that, again, if we were adding a second hard drive, we would need to find additional mounting space somewhere inside this PC. In our instance, we would need to take out one of our diskette drives, in your particular PC, your mounting bracket might not be situated so that it's accessible from the top, as in this case, but rather accessible from the front using a slide-in bay rather than this type of mounting bay. Now we can proceed to looking at how we need to change our computer setup program in order to recognize the additional or the new configuration for this hard drive. To proceed with the hard drive upgrade, as with the other upgrades, you need to put your case back together and reattach all of the cables, and we're also going to need to run the computer setup program to adjust its internal configuration. As I had mentioned earlier, DOS has a 528 megabyte limit in terms of the disk size that it can use. We discussed 2 alternatives in getting around that limit. One was to use an advanced operating system that replaces DOS, and the other option was to use a third-party utility that works with DOS to work around that 528 megabyte limit. You really do have another option, and that is to perform a BIOS upgrade or a BIOS replacement. BIOS upgrade and replacement products come in either software or hardware, and you can find out about them from the manufacturer of your PC or from your hard drive manufacturer. If you're interested in pursuing that, you should contact them. Also, make sure that you've established the master-slave relationship properly between the IDE hard drives if you have more than one in your PC after the upgrade. Remember, when you have more than one IDE hard drive, one hard drive has to function as a master and the other will function as a slave. You have to properly establish that relationship. Now let's take a look at the setup changes that we need to make. We've already booted the system and entered the setup program, and as you can see, the setup program has notified us that it's recognized a hard drive different from that which was previously in the system, and that it has automatically updated the configuration for that new hard drive. So we simply proceed again into the setup configuration specifications, and you will notice in this area we have our fixed disk 1, which is now a type 65, recognizing the 852.6 megabytes available on that new hard drive. Most, if not all, IDE or enhanced IDE hard drives automatically inform the system of their drive type, so you will not need to know that number. But this drive type is the specification that I mentioned to you earlier that you should write down and record before beginning your hard drive upgrade. You would want to have recorded the hard drive type for the old hard drive before you removed it and replaced it, in the event you had a problem and you had to return the system to its original configuration. At this point, we just simply need to exit and save the changes made to the system setup, and the PC will reboot from this point and we can proceed further. Our next steps are to look at partitioning and formatting our hard drive before we can use them. After rebooting, the system has produced this error indicating that the disk is unusable because it has not yet been partitioned or formatted. To proceed to the point where we can partition and format the hard disk, we first need to reboot with a bootable DOS diskette. We're going to run a program that's in DOS called fdisk. And I'm going to manually show you this procedure. But be aware that if you are installing DOS or Windows 95 for the first time, those programs will automatically recognize that the disk needs to be partitioned and formatted, and it will do that for you. In the event that you aren't installing one of those operating systems for the first time, you will need to run this fdisk utility as we're doing now. The first step in the procedure will be to create a DOS partition, which is option number 1, which is the default choice it's offering us at the moment. The next menu then offers us options that allow us to create the primary DOS partition, which on a blank hard drive is what we're going to want to do. It's now asking us also if we want to make use of the maximum amount of space. We'll accept that answer and proceed. The system is now going to reboot with a partition already created at the maximum possible size for DOS. After rebooting from the fdisk program, we are now back at the A prompt of our bootable DOS diskette. And to perform the final step of preparing our hard drive for use, we will run the format program, which will, as its name implies, format our hard drive so that we can begin to copy all of our program and data files to it. The first partition on a hard drive is always called C, so we will format our C drive, and we will include the S switch, which we make use of by typing it in as a slash followed by an S, which is required in order to make this hard drive bootable on its own without having to use a DOS boot disk. the system is now beginning to format the hard drive, and in doing so, it gives us one last chance to change our mind in the event that we've already got data that we're trying to protect. In this instance, we have no data to protect, so we will just begin the formatting process. As you can see, this will take a little while to complete, but once it's done and you reboot the system, you will then be at your C drive and you will be able to begin to use it as you normally would. The system has now completed its formatting of the hard drive, and it's wondering if we'd like to give a label to this disk partition. If you'd like to, you can type in up to 11 characters to provide that label at this point. We'll just hit enter to bypass it, and it's now telling us that we have roughly 528 megabytes of disk space available for use. And if we reboot at this point, we no longer need to use our bootable DOS disk, because on the next reboot, the C drive will handle all of the procedures necessary for booting.
As you have seen, upgrading your PC is not really that difficult. With just a little knowledge and effort, you can keep your PC operating at the leading edge of hardware technology. Once there, you can use any of today's or tomorrow's educational, entertainment, and productivity software. And after all, isn't that what owning a PC is all about?
Sue, have you upgraded to Windows 95 at home yet?
No, I haven't. Remember, I don't have enough space on my hard drive.
That's right. Well, you need to get that hard drive upgraded because it's great.
Why?
Well, it's a fabulous pinball game.
Oh, you're kidding.